In the 70s, my grandparents had a pool, and my grandfather would line us up in our bathing suits, my mom, my aunt, my sister, and me, and guess our weights. He was always right. In 1998, when he was in his 80s and I was in my 30s, my boyfriend John and I went to visit him and my grandmother in Boston where they lived. And this is the story. My grandfather tries to speak, but he has lost most of his words to dementia. Such a pretty girl, he finally manages. My grandfather recognizes me. I know this not because I think I am pretty, but because I know he believes it to be so. It's always been his role as charming, handsome patriarch to measure the beauty of his daughters and granddaughters. My grandfather was a diamond salesman with impeccable hats and Cary Grant overcoats and a gold signet ring. He knew how to entrance the female customers in his store, and he could make me feel like Cindy Crawford. I owe him my posture. Stand up straight, he'd say, putting his hands lovingly on my shoulders. Be proud to be tall. You look gorgeous. I learned early to consider my appearance. When I was 8, he and my mother discussed restricting my snacks. And at 10, he told me no boy would date a girl who chewed on her fingernails. And at 12, he asked me how many boyfriends I had. When I was young, I didn't give much thought to his obsession with appearance. I liked the attention. But as I grew older, I became a lot more body conscious, joining Weight Watchers twice, and eventually becoming a fitness instructor. But on this visit, I'm just grateful my grandfather knows who I am. He tries to speak again, but it's gibberish. Come on, Dick. That was his name, Dick. Come on, Dick, my grandmother says in her New England Katharine Hepburn accent. Enough of that. Get over here and sit down. My grandmother, who was valedictorian of her high school class and voted prettiest, is still regal as she cares for my grandfather now. She loses her patience, but never complains. My grandfather goes in for a nap, and my grandmother brings out cheese and crackers, and we all sit at the dining room table while she quizzes John and me about current affairs. What do you think about this thing with President Clinton? She asks me. I mean, it's not just the sort of thing that just happens, she continues, cutting cheese. I mean, it's not the sort of thing you get pressured into doing, she says. My grandmother goes back into the kitchen, and I look over at John, who is intently molding his cheddar cheese. Is she talking about what I think she's talking about? I say. I'm pretty sure it's Clinton and blowjobs, he mumbles without looking up. No doubt convinced that the whole conversation is borderline inappropriate. My grandmother returns with a pitcher of ice water. Gram, are we talking about Clinton and blowjobs? I ask. Well, of course, she says. John coughs out cracker bits onto his plate. What did you think we were talking about? She says. My grandfather chooses this moment to reemerge from the bedroom. He's clad in a black cotton turtleneck and nothing else. John continues coughing, begins to sneeze, and covers his face with a napkin. I mean, it's not the sort of thing you just get pressured into doing, my grandmother says. It's not the sort of thing that you get caught up in the heat of the moment and do. Annoyed at the lack of reception, my grandfather does a little jig that jostles his private parts. He raises his arms up overhead and snaps his fingers. My grandmother finally looks up and sees him in the doorway. Oh, hello there, she says. Why don't you go back in and put some pants on? On the final day of our visit, we gather in the living room to say goodbye. My grandmother and John share an air hug. And my grandfather, who has not uttered an intelligible syllable since we first arrived, pats John roughly on the gut that he's acquired from too much business travel, and enunciates perfectly. Can't you suck it in? My grandmother giggles uncharacteristically, and even John stifles a smile. It's a comic moment, but it hides a sadder truth. The words my grandfather has found are used not to say, I love you, or thanks for coming, but to critique someone's gut. I pull myself up to my full height, pull in my stomach, and hug my grandfather goodbye.